We're back. We're back. We're back. I can't believe it. Unbelievable. We made the promise and we keep our promises. Ted, Rall, and I are men of our word. I'm Scott Stantis, editorial cartoonist, coming to you from the right.
And I'm Ted Rall, editorial cartoonist, coming to you from your left, from my left, from the left,
From
a left,
the left, a left.
a certain left. Well, that's kind of true because there's different lefts, Scott. When people say, like, in mainstream media, the left, and they mean the Democratic Party, I'm always like choking a little.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get that. By the way, you're listening to the DMZ America podcast, just to make that.
Yeah, in case you sort of blundered in here and you're like, where the fuck am I? What the fuck is this?
Oh my God! You take you take 8 fentanyls and you end up with this bullshit. Oh wow! Welcome to my world. Anyway, so first things first, Texas. Ted forwarded me this thing, but I already knew about it because I draw for the Dallas Morning News at the currently, and this issue, the Texas Senate just passed a bill. It has already been approved by the lower house of representatives that strips all of the cities, most of their ability to legislate to manage their cities. The bill now goes in front of Governor Abbott, who has advocated for the bill and said he will sign it. He'll sign it to great fanfare. I mean, there is so much to unpack here, Ted, and so much wrong. It defies, I mean, it is so undemocratic, low D, small d democratic, it makes your head spin. I mean, first and foremost, you're essentially usurping local voters' rights to representation. For a party that loves says it loves small government, and they call themselves small government conservatives, this is an awfully big fucking grab.
Well, it is. And I think it's super interesting for a couple of reasons, Scott. First of all, I want to just point out we're talking about HB 2127, AKA the Texas Regulatory Consistency Act. If there's been a more Orwellian sounding state legislation, I'm not really sure what it is. But basically, Governor Abbott is stripping away a sizable amount of regulatory and legislative control that is currently run by cities, counties, and other municipalities in the state of Texas, right? And you can see why they're doing that. Well, the main reason is because, of course, state government in Texas is run by the Republicans, and city governments, for large part, are run by Democrats, right? So
Yeah.
big cities like Dallas and Houston, and I don't know the specific, I'd have to go down to the list, but some of the big, actually Texas has a lot of really big cities. Corpus Christi,
Houston,
El Paso.
Dallas, El Paso, San Antonio, Abilene. I mean,
these are sizable cities.
The main target of this legislation, though, is Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Because they hate the fact that Austin is peopled and populated by non-rural Republicans.
That's right. So they're trying to basically strip Democratic run cities. By the way, they should be careful what they wish for, because this is going to take away, at least in Texas, that old Republican trope about Democrat run cities being filled with crime. Because at this point, these Democratic run cities will only be nominally Democrat run. They will actually be Republican run. So they'll have to take the fall for that. The other half of this, Scott, that I thought was super interesting is that, look, this is something we're going to see a lot more of in the future. I would look to Ron DeSantis to do the same thing as governor of Florida. Strip control from local government. He's already gone after the Disney, which kind of had a local government of its own. I would look at other red states with blue cities to do this all across the country. It's going to be a thing, and it's a real, you might not think it matters, but think about, for example, when your city is a sanctuary city for migrants, or your city has legal abortion, or think about, for example, Denver, which legalized not only legalized recreational marijuana first in the country, but also they've even legalized shrooms. You can get those legally at a dispensary in Denver. If the governor of Colorado is a Republican, he or she might decide to change all that, and that would radically impact the economy of Denver. So this does have big, it has big implications.
Huge implications, and also hugely anti-democratic implications, because it really is saying that you do not have the right to have local representation. You do not have a right to, your city council person, your mayor, your county commissioner. All of those now are null and void. I mean, effectively, the governor Abbott is all of those to you now, and that's dangerous. It's stupid, frankly, and it is completely un-American. Although, Ted, thinking about it long and hard, and I'm no constitutional expert, neither is Ted, but I do like the Constitution. I do like the rule of law. Is there anything to prevent this? I mean, if this goes into the courts, and it will, what do you argue against it? I mean, I can't. And let me say where my confusion comes from. Here in Alabama, they have we have a state constitution that literally has 1,000. I'm not making this up. 1,000 amendments, because there is virtually no local control anywhere in the state. City can't, there are very narrow ways to tax, regulation. I mean, it's so ridiculous. Sometimes, Ted, on the ballot, there is like a thing for Alabama wants to put in 2 traffic lights. The entire state has to vote on that.
That's really dumb.
And it flies in the face of what allegedly Southern politicians have crowed about for 200 years, which is local control and some level of autonomy, right? And so,
well, not to mention, it's very impractical in many ways, right? Because maybe the people of Op know whether they need that traffic signal a lot better than people of Montgomery or Birmingham. I mean, they don't know.
Exactly, but they can vote it down. And a lot of times, it's especially bond issues in those areas. They want to raise bonds or property tax, which is, by the way, in Alabama, the lowest in the nation. If you doubled the property taxes of Alabama, they would still be the lowest in the nation. That's a statistical fact. Yeah, but you can't raise them because I just said why. Anytime it says tax hike on the ballot, what are people going to do? Especially down here. Especially when it comes to, well, that's just encouraging people to read books. You can't have that. Anyway, so keep your eyes open for that one. Ted's absolutely right. You're going to see DeSantis in Florida try to copy that. You're definitely going to see that copied in Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, probably Georgia, probably Tennessee, probably Idaho, probably Iowa. I mean, it's going to be, if they get away with it, shit, let's face it. If you're Governor Ted, that's power you would like to have.
Absolutely. And look, Scott, I was thinking about your constitutional question. I don't think there's any protection or any grounds for a constitutional challenge, even certainly not federally. There's nothing that guarantees the right of the cities or municipalities to self-govern in the U.S. Constitution at all. There's nothing about local control. And that's why there was a big struggle over federalism versus anti-federalism in the early days of the Republic. And that got sorted out by other means. There could be some state constitutions that have such guarantees, but that would require review of all 50 states' constitutions. But overall, I think most state constitutions are pretty much modeled on the national constitution. Most of the things that you see in there kind of are cut and pasted with some modifications. So I would be surprised if there was really the grounds in Texas for a constitutional challenge. And their codes in places like that tend to be very Spartan. I mean, I remember I used to read all the labor laws in every state code as part of. Well, I used to work for a bank, and we used to deal with clients who were trying to establish factories and other facilities in various states, and we wanted to know what the labor codes were like. New York's labor laws, as you might imagine, are voluminous, and literally back in the days of those bound books that you see behind lawyers in those Better Call Saul type ads, they would be like there were like 5 or 6 thick books worth of labor codes for New York. Florida only had 2 or 3 paragraphs of labor protections for workers. and they were pretty scant and vague at that.
Oh my God. Oh my
So,
God.
I mean, so the thing is, I just can't imagine that there's that the city of San Antonio can do anything other than just kvetch. Like, that's it.
I don't know. I'm thinking about this. It struck me that they could hit it as a civil liberties and a civil rights issue.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true,
That
because of the disproportional representation of minority groups. That's really
not
smart, Scott. Yeah.
that, but mostly I would say that it's denying me representation at a city
It could
level.
be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, I think
That's true.
Lawyers who are more clever than we
De
are.
facto, it's not segregation, but it's de facto stripping away representation from minorities.
Yeah.
That could well be, right? Because obviously minorities are disproportionately highly represented in cities, which is, of course, why cities tend to be Democratic.
Urban Democrats of Texas, you're welcome.
Scott will take his 35% fee by Venmo.
Another issue, Ted, you brought up, and I mean, this may shock you, our view of this or not, this is one of those, we're all learning. I try to
Speak
learn.
for yourself.
Okay, but this one, I don't think we have. Okay, I'll tell you what, people, on the Twitters, you can either DM, direct message Ted or I. I'd love to hear your take on this stuff, because Ted, tell what you just said before we started this podcast.
Well, so a group of sororities sisters are suing the University of Wyoming because against their desires and against their approval, the sorority admitted a trans woman who is Artemis Langford, 21 years old, described in the New York Post as 6'2", 260 pounds, and is referred to in their lawsuit basically as a guy. They don't use their preferred pronouns, and they refer to them as a male, as their prior name, Terry Smith. And anyway, they claim the whole thing is creepy and gross, and that they don't feel safe in their sorority house, right? They basically,
well, apparently he gets erections when he sees naked women.
That is the claim. That's right. That, like, apparently the lawsuit alleges that Langford stared at women without talking for hours. Here, this is a quote from the lawsuit. One sorority member walked down the hall to take a shower wearing only a towel. She felt an unsettling presence, turned and saw Mr. Smith watching her silently. In another disturbing incident, the lawsuit alleges Langford became physically aroused. Mr. Smith has, quote, while watching members enter the sorority house, had an erection visible through his leggings, the suit says. At other times, he has had a pillow in his lap. I don't know if you can really criticize a person for having a pillow on their lap, or for that matter, from having an erection, but it's a really interesting case, Scott, because, I mean, you can really see both sides of it, right? I mean, a trans woman wants to live as a woman, and that would include the possibility of entering women's spaces, like a women's bathroom, like even a sorority. I have to admit, I personally can't decide whether this person is brave, foolhardy, or creepy for wanting to do that. And then at the same time,
all of those at the same time.
Could be.
Just throwing it at the
and then at the same time, I look, if I were one of these women, I would probably feel extremely disturbed as well. And this is not like sort of, you know, in the 1980s club scene, a lot of clubs in Lower Manhattan had unisex bathrooms, but there were stalls. You know, you walked into a stall and you walked out into the common area, and, like, yeah, you'd run into members of the opposite sex, but, you know, that's just like checking your hair and washing your hands, and you're fully clothed. I mean, a house is a very intimate environment. You know, I mean, even if the opposite were true, and I was a member of a fraternity, something that would never happen. But
well, who'd
if
have
I
you?
were, I think it would be weird. Look, my son was in Boy Scouts, and Scouting BSA, as it is now called, inexplicably, because that means Scouting Boy Scouts of America, but they started admitting women. And so, like at the last Boy Scout summer camp that we attended, there were female scouts and scout leaders there, and I was like, why are you guys here? This is like an all male. The whole purpose of Boy Scouts is it's a place where guys can be guys. We don't want y'all around. And I don't know that I would feel really very different if it was a trans man who was, gender assigned at birth as female. It's like, dude, like, no, why are you here?
I get that, but I mean, they would respond saying that you're being a bigot, you're being closed-minded, you're not being accepting
Yes.
of that person's choices. And I'd say, yeah, that's probably true. Listen, this is an issue we're dealing with, we're wrestling with as a nation, I mean, internationally as well. As a species, we're dealing with this. I think some are, and I would include Ted and I in that number, are trying to face it with compassion, with an open mind and an open heart.
Absolutely.
But here, if you got someone who's just a dude dressed as a woman in a sorority and it clearly gets aroused and is clearly making these women extremely uncomfortable, there has to be. Can we all just agree that there are gray areas in everything, and that this is one of those times? For instance, I have the same response when I hear that men who identify as women are competing in women's sports. Now, the fact of the matter is, Ted, as a species, males have more muscle mass. They tend to have more quick muscle speed. They just athletically are better. And anyone who wants to challenge me on this, I would be happy to debate you. I'd say even Venus Williams, arguably the greatest women's tennis player in the world, has said that if you put her, she would not be in the top 50 if she had to compete against the men. Take the WNBA champions and put them against any college men's basketball team, and that college basketball team destroys them. It's just a fact of our species.
Yeah, I think Martina Navratilova said the same thing about tennis. She said that she would not have been qualified as even a very low-ranked professional men's tennis player.
Right, and that's not to say that's neither good nor bad. It's a physiological fact. So when you see this one, they swam for an East Coast college. I can't remember which, but they broke the record. They decimated the swimming records. That's not fair. That's not right. And the same is true. Like I said, if you have someone who's clearly making lewd, leering,
bonery,
boners at your sorority sisters. I'm sorry. Do you see do you see the irony of that sentence I just uttered?
I'm not sure your sorority sister should really have the capability of having a boner. I mean, you could certainly, I'm sure lesbians have been members of sororities and are in numerous amounts. I mean, I wouldn't know. Greek life is something that is alien to me, but I'm sure that's true. And these, it's like, it doesn't matter if a lesbian is aroused because it's not visible to their sorority sisters. It just doesn't matter.
And you and I, coming up in the arts, have had numerous gay friends. I mean, it would not bother me to have a gay member. I was on the football team in high school. Because that's not how gay and lesbian people operate. They don't sit there and leer.
Right.
And, that's not how it works.
Yeah, they might notice. I mean, in the same way that like a normal person notices, you see an attractive member. In my case, you see an attractive member of the opposite sex outside, and I'll notice, but there's no leering. It's like a quick glance, and then I move on. Right? I mean, that's it. You're not you don't dwell on the situation, but you can't help but dwell on the situation when you're living under the same roof, as is the case here.
Right.
I think the problem would have been solved if, frankly, they had held a vote in the House as to whether or not to admit this person. And
Were
then
they forced to
could have,
admit?
yeah, apparently the national sorority, which is Kappa Kappa Gamma, said that the national council president had pressured the local chapter to allow them to join. The lawsuit alleges that the sorority ignored the official bylaws and, in fact, instead referring to something called the Guide for Supporting Our LGBTQIA plus members, that said that Kappa Kappa Gamma is a single gender organization. So there appears to be some breaching of the official rules of the sorority in order to sort of kowtow to a woke agenda.
And like I said at the top of this segment, or at the top of this discussion, neither Ted nor I are advocating anything other than we're trying to figure this out.
That's why it's in the news, Scott. That's why it's in the news. It's because it's a gray area, because it's a collision zone between competing interests. That's what makes it interesting, and that's why we're talking about it.
But the case you mentioned is going to give fodder to those who hate transgender people and want to demonize them, because
that's true.
Clearly this person is taking advantage of those rules. I always felt that if you were transgender, and Ted's tried to walk me through this, I did not understand. I always felt that I'm going to consider you transgender when and only when you actually go through the surgery. That's it.
Well, apparently but the thing is, Scott, I think the best way to think about it is, you probably know gay people who talked about how they came out after a process, right? Like, it wasn't just like they turned 16, they had puberty, they're like, oops, I'm gay, bam. It's like often, like even Dan Savage, I'm pretty sure, who's very gay. He does Savage Love, the sex advice column. He dated women before he dated men. So there's a journey, right? And oftentimes people kind of like have to figure out, like, okay, they're doing the heteronormative thing. They discover it doesn't feel right for them, and then they evolve, and finally, ultimately, they realize who they are, and they accept that they're gay, and they come out as gay, hopefully, because that's better than living in the closet. And I think there's an analogous journey, maybe harder, frankly, for trans people, where they go through this process, and it's different for everyone, but basically it's not quick. And, so I think there's a sort of in between, like, hey, I was born a man, but I really think I would like to live as a woman, but I don't know that I want gender reassignment surgery yet, which is also, by the way, super expensive and difficult. I mean, for obvious reasons, because they cut off your penis, which I myself would find very challenging.
I would find that extremely challenging. Okay, so we have a long way to go, a lot of things to learn here. So we're leave it at that. Is that
okay? We'll have to. I guess we're going to be canceled, okay. just like J.K. Rowling, but minus the bank account.
Yeah, I thought, if you're going to cancel me, give me $1 billion first, please.
Yeah, I'll take half. I'm good. Oh,
geez. Thanks a lot, Rall.
J.K. Rowling, by the way, never said anything anti-trans. Nobody's ever been able to that she ever actually said that was anti-trans.
She questioned. She says, "I don't get it. Explain it to me." It's like what we just did, which is we're asking questions, and we're open to anyone who wishes to answer and give us some advice.
Yeah. And I think what's happened here is that the struggle for trans acceptance has gone from 0 to 100 in the quickest time of any emancipation struggle that I can think of. I mean, think about the thousands of years it took for women to go from being chattel to being able even to vote and be allowed and be considered, at least theoretically, to have equal rights in the workplace, and to be acknowledged when they're sexually assaulted and such. And we're still not where we need to be. Gay rights many years it took. But 25 years ago, when say a movie like Boys Don't Cry came out and like sort of started to shed light on the struggles of trans people. Now we've gone to the, Caitlyn Jenner celebrity trans thing. The woman who the trans woman who had the controversy, the Miller Lite controversy, or was it Bud Light? I forget which shitty beer
Bud
it was.
Light.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. Can I ask a question real quick, Ted? You're an urban sophisticate. Do you or anyone in your circle drink Bud Light?
Fuck no. It tastes like piss. It's not in Manhattan where I live. It's not even fucking on offer. You can't even get it. Like if you walked into even the diviest of dive bars and asked for a Bud Light, they'd be like, get the fuck out of here, loser. No, like a cheap beer. There might, I haven't seen Bud on tap in a long time. There was a period where PBR was like a hipster beer, Pabst. And it, even so, that kind of like came and went. I think maybe there's outposts in Brooklyn that still have it. But, these days, I'm trying to think what would be a shitty, cheap beer, like Rolling Rock, maybe.
Yeah, Miller Lite, is equally shitty.
But it's also not you really can't even find it except in the store.
Well, here's the thing that shocks me. I've asked a lot of my friends, and maybe I'm just an elitist pig, but no one drinks Bud Light. However, when the story broke,
well, people do drink Bud Light, just not anyone.
It's the number one beer in the country by a lot.
Yeah.
So Ted Nugent or some other asswipe.
By the way, who wants Bud Light? Bud is a shitty beer by itself. Bud Light is the shittier version of the shitty
beer. Because it's cheap, it's inexpensive, and you can drink a lot of it.
If I was going down that road, I'd be like, okay, I can do bottled Buds, not light. Even so, the first 6 are going to go down hard, no question. And you're going to be in pain the next day. There's like polonium in it or something.
Yeah, no doubt.
Like all those Russian dissidents who like get, claim they were poisoned. That was just Bud Light,
And talk about a moron, the marketing person for Bud Light. What they did is they picked, for those of you unfamiliar with the story, although if you're listening to us, you probably know it, but a transgender influencer was approached by Bud Light to endorse their product and try to sell it. And it makes perfect sense trying to reach out to new markets. And the marketing person for Bud Light said, we don't like our current consumer is too old. We want to get someone younger and better, effectively is what she said. And it's just like, wow. So essentially you're selling something to a crap ton of people and you're selling a crap ton of it. And you're saying, fuck them. We want the young folks.
Yeah. Well, what it was just like, it was like, the mouse that roared, right? It's like attempting to go way beyond your station. If a beer like Lagunitas decided to do that and like, we're going to stretch the envelopes here and see what we can get. That I get. But like, but Bud is a MAGA, red state, flyover country, trailer park, Confederate flag, black bashing, pro cop, Blue Lives Matter, Trump is a god, beer. It is a beer for shit kickers who love Jesus. That's what it is. Yes. It is not a trans friendly beer. It is just not. And it's like, that's taking a giant shit all over the brand. It's like, it just doesn't make sense. It's not even like, oh, this is a national brand. Like, let's say McDonald's were to do that. That might have more of a chance of success because people eat McDonald's is everywhere. It's in blue America, red America. Bud Light is a red thing completely. It's like NASCAR. Like NASCAR should not have a transgender spokesperson.
Well, before we tie this into a neat little bow, I want to just off the top of my head, but I think we're going to do this every episode now in perpetuity, Ted. Yeah,
thanks for checking. Whatever happened to consent?
I am a red governor You're a blue mare.
Oh, fair enough. All right, that's how it is. All right,
But
I
no, but
get.
I think you're gonna like this a lot. I'm actually quite frankly stealing this from my dear friend Patty Vasquez, who's on WCPT in Chicago, and I just loved that she did this at the end of each show. She asks, Ted, what are you reading, and what are you watching?
Mm, mainly porn. No.
What kind of porn?
So currently I'm reading Thomas Jefferson, A Life, which is a late 90s biography of the former president of our third president, who I thought it looked new at the bookstore, but it's not. It's 20 years old plus. But it's pretty good, and it has lots of factoids, like the fact that in 1750, half of all Americans were either enslaved or indentured servants,
Yeah.
which is pretty fucking amazing. What am I watching? I've been watching The Diplomat
Oh, how is that?
on Netflix. Well, it's ludicrous. And
Okay.
and the woman desperate. I mean, the conceit is ridiculous. The conceit is that the president wants is going to switch out vice presidents, which for an election campaign, which, as you know, doesn't happen anymore, really,
Right.
and really can't or shouldn't, and that she is. They try her out by appointing her ambassador to the court of St. James, and so she becomes British ambassador to Britain, even though she has a background as sort of a badass ambassador who used to serve in like war zones like Afghanistan. And so, obviously it's a fish out of water story. And inexplicably, she doesn't seem to own a bottle of shampoo. Her hair is just it's as listless as Clovis caught in the rain. It is an ugly scene. But it's one of those things, as stupid as it is, I just keep watching. It's filmed a lot like The Crown. In fact, like the way the cars drive into these sumptuous British manors, it looks exactly the same as in The Crown when the cars go through the gates of Buckingham Palace. So, it's like that. What about you, Scott? What are you reading and watching?
I'm reading. I picked up a book and I was stupid because I didn't read the whole thing. We were just out to get a cup of coffee, and it was also support independent bookstore day. So we went to
Cool.
a favorite independent bookstore, and they had a coffee shop. So I ordered my coffee, and it was a book that said winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Well, it turns out this author's book before this book had won the Pulitzer Prize. It was called Olive Kitherington. I can't remember, but the book I bought was Olive Again, which is the follow-up to the Pulitzer Prize-winning book. So I finished the sequel first, and now I'm reading the original. The author is amazing, Ted. I mean, they tell you to stave off or to at least help keep your cognitive skills sharp, to keep your brain working. Read fiction, not nonfiction, but fiction. And you and I love nonfiction,
right?
But once in a while, I'll throw in a fiction book just to kind of keep the gears greased, as it were. This book is excellent. It really, really is. I mean, her writing, she writes about the mundanity of life like no author I've ever read before. It's not poetic, it's not flowery, it's just in how very sad and lonely our existence is. I mean, it sounds, I'm not selling it, but it's just
I know you're making it sound like a real upper.
Well, you do sleep better, and you're really happy when you wake up the next morning. But I read at night mostly. When I go to bed, I read for an hour. But I strongly suggest it. We're watching. Okay, Ted, do me a favor. I know the people listening can't see it, but I can see you right now. Can you give me a big old eye roll? Just do it. Thank you. Okay. Wow, that was big. We're watching The Chosen. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. It's a series on the ministry of Christ, and it portrays. And Janine and I were like, oh well, okay. People, like millions, tens of millions of views. It's crazy. It was developed.
It's like an Indian American actor.
Yeah,
who plays Jesus?
Shockingly, they are all Mideastern.
Right. However, Indians are not Middle Eastern, for the record.
No. I thought he was Arab. I thought he had a Muslim
name. He
looks
really Indian in the ads I saw on Fox.
He does a lot of Christian movies. He did the one about Jesus freaks. with Kelsey Grammer that just came out recently.
Mm.
But this was designed. It's the guy who produced it is the son of the one who did these. What's it called? Left Behind series.
Oh God.
Yeah, about so yeah, no, but that's what Janine and
About
I
the
thought
rapture.
the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my wife and I had the same view. It was like, okay, this got great people who we respected said this is really, really, really good, and we're just going, okay, we'll watch an episode or two, and it's really, really, really good. It humanizes, it fills in a lot of the gaps that the gospel, doesn't, kind of skips around, and
Mm-hmm.
the portrayal of Jesus is terrific. He's very, very, very human. He has a sense of humor, which I love because I always thought that because let's face it, every time you see Jesus portrayed in cinema, it's always
Yeah, but you can kind of tell from the Bible that he was a wry motherfucker. You can.
And they have there's a couple of very funny scenes. They're traveling. They come to a house where they're going to stay for the night. The guy who owns the house opens the door, says, "I have 7 bedrooms. You're welcome to them. One of them is haunted by my grandmother." And Jesus says, "Ooh, I want that one." Just something that's human and something that I would say, frankly. It just and the way that the apostles are constantly bitching at each other. I mean, they're constantly and they're not very bright. And they're always surprised.
Thomas never believes me.
Yeah, no. It's something like that.
Peter's really, I'm gonna be the big boss. I'm the CEO.
They address that because Jesus early on, if you remember, says you're my beloved. And everyone else is saying, who the fuck is this guy? Why are you? And he's constantly defending himself, saying, listen, you're just saying that because Jesus likes you best.
I look at Paul yeah, we should trust this guy. Dude gets heat stroke on the road to Damascus, and suddenly he's all holy.
It is really, I did you watch the series Rome on HBO?
Of course, yeah. Several times.
Very similar tone and texture, trying to get the costumes right, trying to get the environment right. It's very, very Jewish. It
would need to be.
So far we've just finished watching season 3. Season 4 is yet to be launched. I think we told our kids that we were watching this, and they both looked scared shitless, we're going to force them to watch it. we're going to proselytize to you.
It does sound a little bit like Kale.
No, it's not. It's a really good, because it's a good story. I mean, it's a great story.
The greatest story ever told is kind of a shitty movie. Just saying.
This is true. No, and that's what I mean, is that it is a shitty movie because, like I said, Jesus, and lo, I say to you,
truly he was the Son of God.
Yes, exactly. This isn't that way. They're dirty. Jesus sweats it's just.
You sweat too. Someone we're hammering nails through your hands.
We haven't gotten to that point yet. Thanks a lot. Spoilers. Thanks a lot, Ted. It does come. For those who are not religious or are not Christian, it does come at it with the presumption that Jesus is the Messiah. So it takes its source material are the 4 Gospels. So I'm just saying that's, if you're reticent to look at something that's religious that way,
a Son of God. I'm just
is that Howard Cosell or who is that?
At the Maurice Richard Arena. It's but he I remember I used to love Howard Cosell, my favorite sportscaster.
Watching a YouTube on a fight I watched a million years ago, and Howard Cosell was the announcer. Oh my, so good.
He was the best. I will from henceforth be speaking like Howard Cosell.
Ted Rall is amongst cartoonists the greatest of all.
Truly, he was the greatest cartoonist of all time, and the most consistently snubbed by awards.
Well, the other thing, if I may, real quick, and then we'll close things up, is The Chosen. Also, it was based on an app. You can now stream it. I think Netflix may have it, but Amazon, one of those streaming services now has it as well. But initially, you got the app, and by the way, the app works great. If you have a smart TV, you stream this thing from your iPhone. and you just hit the, cast it to my TV, and it works really well. Anyway, so and I actually, Ted and I share a Hollywood agent, and I texted him a couple of things I wanted to talk to him, but one of the things I mentioned in this is, have you seen The Chosen? I'm really fascinated by the model they used to produce this. Granted, the producer had access to the Christian community and could put the word out saying, hey, and the first season is crowdfunded, and they list people's names and it goes on for like 17 minutes. It's crazy how many people gave them money to do this. Most production houses, most people probably wouldn't have access and put the call out. But it's an interesting way to do it. I mean, it's a huge smash success, and it leapfrogged over all of the traditional. I mean, that wasn't just terrestrial television, but it leapfrogged over streaming and cable and all those guys. So I'm kind of mesmerized by that as well.
It's a different world. We should probably wrap it up, but we live in a world now where Newsmax now has more viewers than CNN.
Is that true?
That is true.
Jesus Christ. Well, speaking of viewers, Ted, where can we view your work?
You can view my work at whowhatwhy.org. You can view it at rall.com, gocomics.com/Ted Rall. You can also hear, and view my work with my radio show on Sputnik, which is called The Final Countdown, co-hosted with Manila Chan. It is on Sputnik News. It's on Sputnik Radio. Just Google it, or you can find it on Rumble. It's Eastern Time, 10 a.m. to 12 noon, Monday through Friday. And Scott, where can people view your work?
Well, I just want to chime in too, and so I listen to the show regularly, and it's a good show. It really is. You guys have great guests, and the discussion is top drawer. So if you're listening to this podcast and you listen this long, you're going to want to listen to Ted Rall and Ted and Manila's show on Sputnik. And you know what, Ted? People should listen to it just to stick a thumb in the eye of the idiots who are trying to ban things like Sputnik and RT and
that's true.
Because I tried to get my smart speaker to do it and it wouldn't do it. Well, fuck you! Don't censor me, you little bastard.
Right, but
it still does. So I have to. I stream it through my laptop. Anyway, if you want to see my work, go to Scott Stantis, gocomics.com/Scott Stantis, gocomics.com/Prickly City. See my political comic strip. Go to Chicago Tribune and go to the opinion section. You can see a gallery of the work I do for them. At the moment, you can go to Dallas News and see the work I do for the Dallas Morning News. Ted and I also are involved in a thing that I would encourage you to download on your phone called Center Clip. They're like mini podcasts, 30 seconds to a maximum of 5 minutes long. It's really an exciting and a really interesting new thing. And because you can have back and forth. Friend of ours, I just mentioned earlier in this podcast about Patty Vasquez took Mitch on, and really because she has a kid who has special medical needs, and Mitch was making fun of masking. Anyway, you can see all that and more. It's a free app. I would strongly urge you to download it, please, and check it out, because Ted posts roughly 17 times a day. Hard to keep up with that.
I represent
well,
that
you
remark.
do. You really do. Anyway, okay, so that about does it for this edition of the DMZ America podcast. Ted, thanks.
Thank you, Scott.
We'll talk to everybody later. Keep it real, as the kids say. Well, they haven't since the 1990s, but you get it.